Welcome, everybody, to Stay Curious. I'm your host, Mark Marquette, and I'm so happy you've joined us inside our studios here at the American Space Museum in downtown Titusville, Florida. Today, I've got a man who grew up on the streets of our beautiful green screen here. Vernon, how are you doing? Vernon
Good to see you.
Conner. He has written a cool little book called Behind the Missiles. All right, we're going to talk about his dad, Al Conner. And a good little read there. You're going to want to get it. And it brings back a lot of what we're all about, Vernon, here at the American Space Museum. We celebrate the birth of the American space age. It began with the streets of Cape Canaveral, Cocoa Beach here. And you were a young growing boy
Yeah.
when your dad was involved with the space program.
Oh, yes.
Welcome,
Oh,
welcome.
yes. Thank you.
We tell everybody how we met.
Well, there was an open house at the Van Air Command Museum down a little bit south of here, and turns out the American Space Museum had a table right next to mine where I was selling some of my books, and we got to talking, and it seemed like we had a lot of interest in common. So
Yeah, that was back
we
in the
got invited.
spring, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to make this work out here. Thoroughly a beautiful read here. We hear so many stories from space workers that sometimes my day I wish I just flipped on a tape recorder because I'm hearing stories all day long that try to remember later. But that's how this book reads, is a very uh, insightful and intellectual look at your dad as a member of our space program there. And those of you out watching on our normal broadcast here, we had a little technical snafu, so mostly we try to go on time, but when we don't, we'll be there regardless, unless I post it on Facebook. But we thank everybody for watching on our YouTube channel. We're approaching 4,000 subscribers on YouTube, so tell your friends. They're not going to get any kind of content that they're going to get like today, talking to one of the siblings of a space picture of you, and there's your dad, what, 8, 10 years old
He's
there
probably about 10. Yeah.
in there, and where'd he grow up?
Well, he grew up on several farms just outside of Lynchburg, Virginia, which is in the central part. They had a real hard time when he was growing up. The best way I can describe it is when the Great Depression hit, they didn't know it.
That's
Um,
interesting. Okay,
he was
didn't affect them.
No, not really. They never owned a car. They went into town on a wagon. So he told me many
With
times.
horse or donkey?
Yeah,
or
there was a horse pulling the wagon, and that's
mule?
how they went into the store to get supplies and whatnot. Now he was born in 1915, so that shot would have been taken probably about 1924, 1925.
Interesting. Raj, would you do me a favor and get my phone over there so I can keep up with Marty with the questions and people who are there? Thank you very much, sir. Uh,
But it was a hard scrabble life they had.
and he become into the highest tech job around, which we're gonna just talk a little bit of space history here that you and I talked about today. July 10th, 1963 is the launch of Telstar. Okay, they're on a Thor rocket. The bulbous payload up there at the top uniquely did that. And there is Telstar, the first communication satellite. And you and I were talking about that. You remember it.
Oh yeah, I remember that, but I guess I remember the song better. It was
And
a
of
song
course,
called
I've got
Telstar.
the song there by the Tornadoes
Yeah,
from
that,
England.
that
Yeah.
still is one of my favorites.
It's an instrumental, real whiny,
Yeah.
space age. Kind of like the Star Trek theme in a way
Yeah, yeah, it
in
is.
there. But so go to your music provider and put in Telstar. This was in November, and it became a #1 hit. Probably not because of the music, but because of the cool cover of Telstar there.
There you go.
And Telstar, this small little satellite, so many firsts. The first live TV broadcast across the pond, across the Atlantic, radio, other things done. Just an amazing unsung hero of the space age. I think 3 years ago today, 1962, is when it was launched on this Thor rocket there. Just the primitive things. And your dad started working at NASA when?
Well, he actually started working at NACA, which was the predecessor to NASA, in 1944 or 45. And then when NASA was formed in 1958, we moved down here. So he worked there until late in 1972 when he retired. So we got down before they started sending up the chimpanzees, and he retired during Apollo.
NACA, National Advisory Council on Aeronautics, formed just about 5 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, and then segued into the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So we're going to talk, jump around a little bit on a timeline here with Vernon about this book that I thoroughly enjoyed. There's quick little chapters in there, a few long chapters and short chapters to read. And the kind of book that I like, because I usually do my reading at night and kind of tired, and I drift off and go like, what did I just read? I got to go back 3 paragraphs. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, Vernon, and I got some cool questions. Let me get down there. And Marty's got a question already, I think.
Yeah, we got a question from Mark Bell. Is Telstar still in orbit?
No, that's a good question there. And who knows the answer to that? There's Mitch Rothman on there, Steve Joka. Something went there. We've had all kinds of electrical issues the last few days. Just really interesting there. And get my... excuse me there a second when I'm trying to bring up some of our viewers' comments here. Marty, I was seeing them for a while, and now I'm not. So what's going on here?
They're there.
Are you okay over there? Yeah. I had a little glitch. We've had some horrendous storms out here.
Telstar is in orbit.
It is in orbit? All right. When's it coming down?
Not today.
Not today. Okay, Chicken Little says. Okay, well, Vernon, we really talk a lot about our space workers like Marty Winkle on the board here for 5 years with me, has been national treasures. And you've got a picture of our Mercury monument out there, the fleet-footed Mercury messenger there. And I went out there this morning, okay? And it's on the west side of the Mercury monument that your dad is out there.
Yep, he's there.
And you mentioned in the book about this being out there, and he's around some of his friends. One of our friends, Jack Martin, I cut Jack off in the right. He's right to the right of your dad there. And this is how the museum was founded. We created these monuments out there with the handprints of astronauts, the Mercury astronauts. Of course, this was in the late 90s, so Gus Grissom had passed away. And for $100, your family gave us $100, and we etched your dad's name there. And he's NASA, which is, he wasn't a contractor, all right? And you see the other buddies, Broughton, Wiley, Guidry there, probably all friends of your dad's there. And, this is a lasting memorial to your dad. How's that make you feel?
Well, makes me feel really good. The sense of permanence there.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you go out there, he's on the same side, the west side, where we've got Deke Slayton. And the first time I saw Deke Slayton's handprints was here out there many years ago. And my God, I couldn't believe it that he's got the ring finger of his left hand missing.
Yeah.
He got lopped off at age 5 in Sparta, Wisconsin. That celebrates him.
Really?
As a kid, and with an axe, got cut off.
Wow.
And he became an astronaut. It was apparently the one digit that you could just really do without, particularly if you're right-handed. Okay, and now you're going to see a lot of pictures of Deke Slayton, everybody, with his left hand in his pocket. Yeah, you'll see if I'm right. But imagine, I couldn't believe it when I saw that. So talk a little bit about the writing process behind this, and then we're going to jump around with some good pictures here.
Okay.
Are you a writer? A wannabe writer? How was the process of you writing this, Vernon?
Well, I started out just wanting to preserve some experiences either that I'd had or that people I knew had that I knew would never make it into the history books. They were all behind the scenes type stuff, but I thought they were worth preserving. And I never would have dreamed that I would have had enough to put in a book. So I just started out with some of Dad's stuff from NASA, and then it kind of expanded from with other people. And it's everybody kept saying, "Oh, you've got all kinds of stories there. You can make a book out of that." And I thought, nah, never in a million years. And after about a year or two of just tinkering around with it as a hobby, I had this critical mass. It was enough to make a book out of, and I just really enjoyed the process. And it's self-published on Amazon. I did not shop it to a publisher or anything like that, but I just enjoyed the process a great deal. And
What group helped you with that?
well, I belong to a writers group in the town that I live in, and we meet every other week and just critique each other's work. And so I ran more or less each chapter, each story by my wife or my writers group, and we would, I took their comments and then cycled it through some people I knew who had actually grown up there, and then it eventually came out as a book, but it started out as a hobby.
Well, there's some, and I want to give some acknowledgments there, but he's got little chapters in here. Dad joins up, and we head down for a while, leaving Virginia, getting ready to work. The first Space Center tour. I hadn't read that. What was that like, your first Space Center tour?
Fast.
Oh, yeah.
What happened was right after Shepard shot, they opened the Cape Canaveral or parts of it to the public, but the public was only the family and presumably friends of the space workers. So each car had a pass, and we lined up way outside along this little bitty road. And after an hour or two of waiting to get in, they opened the gates, and there were security guards all along the way telling people to move faster, move faster. So there was no actual tour. They had the route marked out, and then a security guard along the way saying go, 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 but you got to see the buildings. And so after that whirlwind tour, you came out the other end and you were thrilled to death because nobody else on the planet other than space workers and you had been able to see where this stuff was happening. Even though it was just for a few minutes, it was still very exciting. And that's how the very first Space Center tour went.
And Marty's got a question from one of our intelligent viewers today.
Yeah, Mark Fell is asking, can he buy the book from the museum?
From the museum, no, not that I know of, but it's available on Amazon.
Go to Amazon, Behind the Missiles there, okay? We might get some, buy some to sell. This is really a good read. I enjoyed it a lot. I just didn't read it from front to back. I grabbed little sections of it. But first, tell us a little the thumbnail story of what your dad's talents were. How did he get down and hired by NASA, and then he become a NASA quality inspector.
Okay. Well, he started out as a farm boy. He plowed the fields behind a horse. And when he got older, he went into Washington, D.C., hoping to strike it big, but he was wound up parking cars for people, and he just saw no future in that. By that time, he had met my mother and wanted to get married, and he knew he had no skills, but he seemed to be a very technically oriented person. And he wasn't a big one for school because he had dyslexia, and nobody knew what dyslexia was in those days. He just thought he was dumber than anybody else, and he was really one of the smartest people I ever met. But
like Einstein.
Yeah.
And yeah, right.
Exactly.
Had dyslexia.
So he joined the Army Air Corps, wound up getting shipped out to Hickam Field in Hawaii. And he was there for a couple of years, and he went through mechanics training and became an aircraft mechanic. And he was there, like I say, he was there for a couple of years. And then they opened the Hawaiian Air Depot, which was a facility where they were going to strip down all the airplanes in the Pacific that had reached their operational limits and put them back out rather than send them back to the States. And they offered spots there to people who were mechanics who were just ready to get out of the service. And so that's what happened. He went to work there. And he was there about a month, and the Japanese bombed the place. So he wound up being at the Hawaiian Air Depot for about 3 years instead of 5. And he came home, managed to come home on a leave, but he got married, and he was able to get a job with NACA at Langley, because they were Langley Field, which is in Virginia. They were doing experimental work. And so he got a job as a mechanic there, installing the things that the engineers came up with. When they said, you ought to join our reserve unit so you don't get drafted again. He says, look, I tried to get back in. They wouldn't take me. Let them come get me. And they did. So they came, they drafted him, they sent him out. And by the time all was said and done, the war was over. He spent a year putting airplanes in mothballs in Kansas. And then he went back to NACA as an airplane mechanic. That's where he was when NASA was formed. And while he was at the Hawaiian Air Depot, he moved his way up to being an aircraft inspector. So instead of working on the planes, he was inspecting it. So he took those skills, and when he went down, he was basically an airplane mechanic on Mercury capsules. And he did that for a while. Then he became a quality control person there and began inspecting, the Mercury capsules to make sure all the nuts and bolts were where they were supposed to be.
Here at the Cape
in Hangar S.
Yes, you do some great stories of Hangar S there, legendary Hangar S. Bob Granath, our in-house historian, did a great program on Hangar S out there, where the astronauts were trained, where they lived for a while, and where a bunch of primates lived with them, right?
Yeah.
In there, and that your dad. I get there. I want to get a picture of your dad up there. There's your home.
Typical tract home is built in 1957. It looks like so many others from that time.
Everybody's wanting to know what that ride is there.
That's a 1954 Plymouth Belvedere, and that's the one we came down in. So that probably would have been taken in 1960, 61, something like that.
What do you remember as a kid about that house?
Well, one of the things I remember was that it was oil heated, and so the oil furnace was right at the end of the hallway leading into the living room. That's where the TV was, and there was a little vent on the hall side. And when we first moved down, what I would try to do is sneak around, and I didn't want to look around the corner to see the TV because I didn't want to get caught. So I try to look through the vent. I'd step on my tiptoes to look into the vent. And then within a couple of years, if I wanted to look through the vent for some reason, then I'd have to bend over. But I grew past the vent. But it was
that's a good memory.
And it was a big yard, which was fun to play in when I was little, but it was a bear to mow when I got older.
There you go, in that hot Florida sun. Oh, there's your mom and dad.
Right.
And the pictures from your book that you supplied me here.
That's either the 1960 Ford Falcon or a 1963 Ford Falcon. Not sure which, but I'm going to guess this 1961.
Convertible?
Nope, just it's just dark in the garage.
Yeah. Bobby socks on your mom there. That's cute. And in there. We've chosen the green screen here, this shot of Cape Canaveral. What are we looking at there? Do you remember? This was not in your book. I found.
Oh, okay.
I think that's 520 right there. Wouldn't that be 520, Marty?
Looks like it.
Marty's an old timer too, so bringing back some memories for you, Marty.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yes.
Yeah, and just think of all the development there. In fact, Ron Johns would be about right. Yeah, Ron Johns would be right over in here.
Yeah.
Quite possibly there, and stuff like that in there.
And that's looking north.
Of course, you were a kid, and you emphasize in your books that it was not easy to get around. Okay, limited number of roads, occasional. wildlife.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little, Vernon.
Well, we live just north of where 520 crosses A1A, on the beach side, and of course now all the roads are paved, but in those days everything was, there were a lot, mainly dirt roads, because the area really hadn't started growing yet, and
Sand roads, though.
yeah, they were sand roads, and in the little housing development we were in, we had the same issue that they had all over Florida, which was mosquitoes.
Well, if this is 520, that could be you on the upper right-hand corner.
Yes,
Right? Yeah.
yes. And you just simply walked out, and we lived in rented a little bungalow. This is summer of 1959. So you go out of the bungalow, walk half a block down the street, go over a little berm that had sea grates on it. You were on the beach.
Huh.
And there was a watchtower there in the vacant lot across the street, and that's what they used to look for U-boats during World War II. So it was still up there. But that was all palmetto bushes and stuff like that. Of course, it's all grown up now. But it was the big thing there was in the evening there were lots of mosquitoes around. They could have been the state bird.
The state bird, the mosquito. I hear you. They are crazy, and the no-see-ums are even named appropriately. Bug the heck out of you. We're talking with Vernon Conner here about his dad, Al. Was it Alfred?
Alfred, yeah, everybody called him Al.
Everybody called him out, called me Al. And there's another shot of the Rocket Ranch under development. Incredibly, this is Port Canaveral in the foreground down here, spreading out. My gosh, there was 2 cruise ships out there today. I was out at Sands Museum for a meeting there at the entrance to the Air Force Base out there, and what a historic place to work. And here's your dad working with a Mercury capsule there in Hangar S. Okay. Think of the crane operators today compared to what they had then.
Yeah.
So forth. You've got a chapter in here that well, let me stick to my little plan here that says I want to get the chapter in there. He's got a chapter in there that says if he works at Cape Canaveral, he'll know what to do.
Yeah.
There was a stigma about saying I work for NASA. I mean, a positive stigma.
Oh yes, a positive stigma, definitely. It was kind of an entree. If you were in a new place and you worked for NASA, you were considered a whiz kid, and if you went to an area that was normally very clannish, where people kept to themselves, you were admitted into the group because you were one of the NASA people on the cutting edge of things. And a lot of times the perception was that you were good at things other than space travel. If you were smart enough to work in the space program, you were smart enough to be able to do other things.
Everybody was like a rocket scientist,
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And I bet that came in handy a few times for your dad there. But you characterize your dad as a humble man.
Yes.
And one part of the book, you're watching the Apollo 11 moon landing, July 20th, 1969, coming up on the 56th anniversary. I remember what you're talking about, everybody Sunday afternoon waiting for the landing with Walter Cronkite or whoever you're watching. And then later that evening, about 10:30, was the moonwalk. 2 hours just mesmerizing that I couldn't take my eyes off of or believe what Buzz and Neil were doing. But your dad's demeanor you describe as just sort of almost melancholy.
Well,
what do you remember about that?
Well, he was very quiet. He was not a particularly articulate person. He could solve any mechanical problem in the world. If you gave him enough time, he could have built Saturn V if he needed to.
Okay.
But he was not real articulate. He didn't talk a whole lot. He didn't express his emotions a whole lot. And it was interesting just kind of watching him look at the television set and wondering what was going through his mind. And I never knew. I could guess, but
He never really
never
talked to you much about it.
No, but you could tell he was very moved, though.
How many siblings in your family? I didn't ask you that.
I'm it.
You're an only child.
I am it.
Okay. All right. Well, And you also took care of your family in the end there, and that's
Yeah.
very, very good of you. You hinted that you may have turned down some opportunities to be
Yeah.
the son to take care of them.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, it was me, and they were always real good to me, and we didn't have a lot of the drama that some families
have,
do,
yeah.
unfortunately, and I
Uh,
wanted to be there for them.
well, that's a good look at this photo of your dad. Talk about this classic photo, which I've never seen but wish I had. You'd be going like, wow, you know. And then here he is transporting. And there's a story about this. Why don't you tell? We don't want to reveal the whole book, but there's the famous Hangar S,
Mm-hmm.
which is the birthplace of America's space program, no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on there? And
Well,
ignore the Jeep or the truck,
okay.
everybody. Everybody's doesn't even see anything going on there except that cool truck
Yeah.
that they'd like to see on one of the auctions.
Well,
Barrett auction, yeah, have that truck on there for $100,000.
oh yeah. Well,
What's
that's
your dad doing?
that's actually him on the truck.
Uh-huh.
Turns out, the first unmanned capsule to go into space ran into a little problem because the launch site was maybe 5 miles away from the Hangar S, and they had a crane at Hangar S to put the capsule onto a truck. Initially, they did not have any sort of cushioning for it, and then they had a way to get the capsule on top of the rocket at the launch pad, but they didn't really have a good way without cushioning to get the capsule from one crane to the other. So they were looking for all kinds of different things. They finally figured out that the only way they were going to get this done is if they were to get a mattress. And so they got a queen size mattress from a department store in Orlando. And a couple of guys got in a truck, saddled up with a purchase order, a check or whatever it was, headed over there. Went to this chain department store, brought the mattress back, and then they built this elaborate structure around it so that the capsule wouldn't fall off, and it also wouldn't take the vibration too much. So that was how the first unmanned capsule got to the launch pad. It was on the back of essentially a pickup truck with a store-bought mattress.
And there probably wasn't a mattress store in Cape Canaveral. They had to go to Orlando.
No, sir, there was not. There was the closest thing they had was Orlando, and Orlando is 40, 50 miles the other way.
That reminds me of your dad growing up in Lynchburg, Virginia, and it being very rural. And when I was in Southwest Virginia for many years, I saw where people went. There weren't shoe stores and so forth up in Norton, Virginia, or Coburn. They had to go down to Johnson City, Tennessee, to buy, to buy goods in there. Of course, Walmart took care of that real quick. Once the first one went in up there. But you don't we're so spoiled by anything you want this book, it'll be at your doorstep tomorrow. Okay, get on Amazon. That's Amazon Prime days, and buy this book. You will not regret it. I've really enjoyed this, and I hope this is the beginning of a good relationship with you, Vernon, because you're all about what America is great about, our space age. And we were talking a little bit about Orlando. Tell us, Dave Stange, you may have flown in here. I know Carlton Bailey goes out to MCO all the time. That's the call sign for the Orlando International Airport. It's not OIA, it's MCO. And I wondered, why is that MCO? Marty, do you know why it's MCO?
I sure do, because I used to fly into it.
That's right. I'm talking an old timer there. All right. Of course he flew into it there. Why? And Chris Calley wants to know. He flies all the time. Why is it MCO? What's that stand for?
Well, originally it was the Orlando Army Airfield, and they trained fighter pilots there during the war. It remained in the military until late 60s, early 70s, and I'll say early 70s, and it was a SAC base. They had KC-135s and B-52s.
Yeah, I can't believe B-52s out there.
Oh yeah, there's even a B-52 in a park right near it now. But anyway, at one point there was an accident with a B-52. It was coming in over just north of downtown Orlando, and it crashed and killed the crew members. And the squadron commander was a man by the name of McCoy. So they renamed it McCoy. And then when it transferred over to civilian use and left the Air Force, they just kept the designation.
So it's McCoy.
And eventually they changed it, but for a long, long time it was McCoy, and it's still MCO on the baggage.
Yeah, yeah.
When it first opened up, also, there's 2 Quonset huts was the terminal.
Is that right?
Yeah.
2 Quonset
Remember
huts
that?
out there.
Yeah.
And now you know. Yeah, now you know. Great, everybody watching there today. Tom Celtano, RG Jubilee. We've got Elena is watching in South Africa. Carlton Bailey's from his wildlife preserve there in Canaveral Groves. Dave Stangy's up. He's in Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We'll go get you some ice cream in Marquette, Michigan, up there, in the UP. Mark Usiak's in Pennsylvania, and I know they're all enjoying this. Cliff Watson is in Australia. How's Friday morning going for you over there, mate? And he sat in this chair and done a couple shows with us. I think you've been on 4 times, right, Cliffy? And Doug Forrest is in Los Angeles. So thank you all for spending some of your time today. What's become a little bit of a social time for people. They love sharing these stories with each other on there. The book is Missiles, Behind the Missiles, okay? And tell us a little bit about, we were talking about transportation, Vernon, and you've got an interesting segment in there about how foreign cars appeared on the scene. Nobody wanted a foreign car in the beginning, and then...
Yeah, what happened was, back in the early 60s, you almost never saw a foreign car.
Hell no, you
No.
had that beautiful big beasts out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, Europe was still recovering from the war, and their roads were smaller. So what was the reason you would want a foreign car in those days? Well, it turns out that who works at NASA, who works at the Space Center? Engineers. So a lot of times I think the mentality was, you know what, if I build spacecraft, then I can make these little things run. And the guys like to take them on as projects, or they get a little one to zip around town in, whatever the rationalization was, either to zip around town or save gas on the long commute up to the Cape. But there seemed to be an inordinate number of foreign cars at that time on the Space Coast. And it seemed like there was one of everything. There was I remember Peugeot was fairly common. You don't see them anymore. Of course, you had the Volkswagens. A friend of mine had one of the early Toyotas. The early Hondas. There was it was a BMW Isetta, I think, where the door opened in the front. And somebody would drive around in that. There was the English Anglia. A friend of mine had a Sunbeam, a Heilmann Minx. There were a number of different ones that you never hear of today, but they were just all over the Space Coast back during those days before foreign cars became popular.
And but nobody wore seat belts. But you've got a great story about that. Would you share with us?
Yeah, nobody wore seat belts in those days because they simply weren't in cars. If you got a car, it didn't have a seat belt until 1968, 1969, whatever it was. And again, what is the Space Center populated with? Engineers, people who like to tinker with things. And so a lot of the guys, especially since they'd come from an aviation background, a safety background, they would install seat belts in the cars. Our cars always had seat belts in them. You know, what you do is you'd order them from some company, they'd send them and you'd install them. Well, one day, my dad and a friend of his were coming home from work on US 1, and the car pulled out in front of them, and the driver was my dad's friend, swerved to avoid him. They rolled over a couple of times, and all Dad got was a little ding on the top of his head, and the other guy wasn't hurt at all. They were a little sore for a couple of days. But if they had not had seat belts on and been in that culture where a seat belt was a perfectly normal outgrowth of what you did professionally, they probably both would have been killed that day.
Very interesting. That's the kind of stories you're going to hear and read in this book here. Or that how long did it take you to put it together? Was
Well,
it a couple years?
a couple
or-
of years, yeah. I just started out as a hobby and played with it when I felt like it, and then once I started getting this critical mass, I became more serious about it.
Um, career change is an interesting angle that you don't read much about, uh, where you talk about your dad talking about the fun of going to work, and this was a space race with Russia, right?
Yeah.
No doubt about it. Your family was in the trenches of this, but it changed a little bit. Talk about how it went from fun to something different.
Well, as any organization gets bigger, it's going to change. And with Mercury, everybody knew everybody else. The astronauts knew the technicians. Here was my dad, a technician who was on a first name basis with the flight director, who was on a first name basis with the astronauts and so on. And it was kind of fun because it was all new stuff. But as it got bigger, with Gemini, for example, the organization got bigger. And actually, during Gemini, he moved away from the hands-on stuff to more of a quality control thing with the job with the fuels and things going into the spacecraft. And of course, as Apollo came along, it became huge. And people really did, if you weren't in that particular section, you didn't know anybody. So by Gemini, he may have seen or met a few of the astronauts. He knew some of them from the Mercury days. But by Apollo, he'd never met any of them.
Yeah, you
just as
talk
an
about
example.
the intimacy with several astronauts during the Mercury. They
Yeah.
were very involved with their spaceship, wanting to, touch it, feel it,
Yeah.
uh,
Oh, yeah.
play with any. Did you have any encounters you talk about with astronaut that sticks out?
Well, with my dad, of course, he knew them all, or all of the Mercury ones. And shortly before Grissom died, he and Grissom were good friends. And shortly before Grissom died, he passed him in the hallway, and they shared a joke about a dummy that they used to have, this man-sized dummy that they'd put in the capsules to substitute for an astronaut, and the dummy had a metal ring in the head, and they could just grab that ring and jerk the dummy out. And so Grissom made a comment that because every time he'd see Dad, he was in a different place. And he'd say, they need to put one of those rings in your head so they could jerk you around to wherever they want to use you. And they laughed about it. And then a day or so later, Grissom passed.
Oh wow!
But that was the kind of relationship that they had. As far as my own, experiences, I've seen a number of them. I've shaken hands with several of them. I had a brief conversation with Gordon Cooper when I was in high school, bussing tables at the local hotel restaurant, and he was eating there. And my segue was to say hello and tell him who my father was. The other was I was buying something at a hardware store in East Orlando, and Bob Crippen was buying a shovel, and I happened to be wearing an Apollo 11 T-shirt, so he was happy to talk with me. He was very, very down to earth, very good guy.
Good old Bob Crippen for sure. We're enjoying some stories. We want you to get the book Behind the Missiles in there. We're going to share a few more stories out of there, but a couple other really awesome photographs. This is one that is for history books that you don't see very often. What are we looking at there, Vernon?
Well, it's a looks like a redstone rocket and what they call a cherry picker.
Mm-hmm.
And that was if there was some last minute thing that caused the mission to be scrubbed, they could roll that up there and pull the astronaut out.
Yeah, we went, how would that work out in an emergency there with the
Yeah.
hatch bolted on
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's a little different now.
But many of you heard about the cherry picker, which was the escape system to get an astronaut out of there. Let's say there was a fuel leak and problem like that, and maybe they had 20 minutes to get him out of there. Very hazardous, very dangerous,
Yeah.
but that's the best picture I've ever seen
Yeah.
of the cherry picker there. And here's your dad. What's he doing there?
Well, that would be in Hangar S. He was getting ready to go into the White Room, and they had to be all suited up for that because it was, very, very sensitive about what they could let in there. They did several different things in Hangar S. They had an altitude chamber and a White Room, or they call it the clean room, and he was clearly running some kind of test. Now that, if you look in the lower right corner there, you'll see a paneling, and that's a part of Alan Shepard's capsule.
Okay, yeah, that's the famous exterior of it there. That's a great photo of your dad there. Do you look through pictures, seeing if you can see him in
Oh, yeah.
photos in there?
Yeah.
I'll be looking for more of them like that too.
I was looking at a show on Mercury. It was a documentary on Mercury on YouTube not long ago, and there was a shot of him, just walking. It's only about 3 or 4 seconds long, but walking up and doing something in the capsule, and it was just a very, very strange feeling because, of course, he passed in 2005, and my mom passed in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
But it was.
Your dad lived to be how old?
He was 89 when he died.
Oh, some good long life, and hopefully they enjoyed the fruits of retirement.
That they did.
Good.
That they did. They traveled quite. They had
Your son made sure of that. It sounds like there. That sounds good.
Well, it was all their planning. They had an RV, and they'd go to different places and send me a postcard.
Well, that's awesome. We're glad to hear people enjoy the retirement there. Of course, the famous liftoff, Alan Shepard there. Those are some pretty cool pictures there. And going off that pad. Just a very simple rocket. And
Yeah.
and then you took a picture of this.
This was on that whirlwind tour of Cape Canaveral.
Uh-huh.
And there's one of the ever-present security guards. They had put a couple of vehicles out there, and I think a capsule, you can see it in the back. But there really wasn't a whole lot there, and you wouldn't have had time to read it or look at it in any depth at the time anyway. But that was taken on the trip, and that's from roughly the same spot when I was able to go out there in 2023.
Very nice out there. And there's a memory. What's that? Well,
one of the things about the space program in those days was we had a whole lot of people coming through that were well known. I got to meet Johnny Weissmuller. I met
really
Hugh O'Brien, who played Wyatt Earp, which was a widely popular TV show at the time.
Right.
During the splashdown parties, all kinds of famous people came through. Well, the commander of the Air Force Eastern Test Range at the time was General David Jones, and he was one of Doolittle's Tokyo Raiders during the war. And so he arranged for a Doolittle Raiders reunion in April of 1970 to coincide with Apollo 13's launch. And so the Raiders came, and I've always been an old airplane nut, the Flying Aces and all of that stuff. And so I was actually able to meet General Jimmy Doolittle, who had one of the first PhDs in aeronautical engineering. He led that raid. He was a Medal of Honor winner.
Yeah.
And so that was a real high point in life to meet them and to meet General Doolittle. And I kind of used that as an example of the variety of people who came in who were tied in with the space shot. My boyhood hero was a guy named Eddie Rickenbacher, and I got to meet him when he came down to see one of the shots. So
Eddie Rickenbacher, what an aviator he was, also owned the Indianapolis 500. And my grandpa beat him in the race, by the way. Yes, tell you about that off camera there.
Excellent.
But I'm a big Indy fan, and Eddie Rickenbacher, amazingly World War II ace.
Well, he was World War One,
but
he wound up being lost at sea for about 24 days during the war when he was doing an inspection tour. So he became famous in World War II as well.
There you go. But no, pictures like this, when you look back in us growing up in the 60s, Vernon, what a capture that was. For one, somebody had a camera. Two, got a photo of you talking to the famous Jimmy Doolittle. and three, look how cool you look back
There you
then. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I've been around things that people didn't take pictures of. Like I was around Carl Sagan, and nobody took a picture
Oh, wow.
of us together. And no one took pictures. Type of thing. Today, it's the first thing that you do.
Oh, yeah.
On there. So I've certainly enjoyed this. I'm going to ask you a few more questions here. Another story or two as we see the Saturn V rolling out there. Marty, go ahead with what you've got.
We have two questions. One's from Mark Bell. Was the redstone bolted to the pad till liftoff?
Was the what?
Was the redstone bolted to the
To the
pad?
pad.
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
I couldn't tell you either for sure, Marty. They certainly had squib bolts to separate stages, but
I mean, I would think so. How about,
Yeah.
it's not going to sit there on its own weight.
yeah, it would have to have something anchoring it there. But
Yeah, I
that's
think
see, 60 years later, we're still asking questions about a suborbital flight there. Um,
And the Redstone was a converted artillery rocket
mhm.
as well.
We got a question from Michael Bruno. Is the cherry picker still around? It seems like a very useful thing.
The what?
There's a cherry picker
Cherry
still
picker.
around.
I don't know that they still use them,
Yeah.
but I am sure they still exist somewhere.
Yeah. Well, of course, this is an innovation for the fire departments and so forth. Don't know if this cherry picker exists anywhere out at the space at Cape Canaveral. We'll be asking our contacts out there about that. That's a good picture to center around Gus Grissom's suborbital flight. It's a July flight. So we'll research that for you there, Michael Bruno, and that's a good little, you just suggested a nice little segment for Stay Curious there. So, and Steve doesn't think it had, it rested on the launch table. The weight rocker held it on the table. And I kind of suspected that, but so the weight did keep it on the rocker table there. Of course, to one of our Steve Jokums up in Illinois up there. So watching the rollout here, you mentioned in the book a very interesting section about how Apathy for the moon race and the moon landings, the Apathy was created very quickly after Apollo 11. The whole world was mesmerized by Apollo 11
Yes.
and the events leading up to it. Let's
Yes.
face it, every crewed launch got a huge attention. 10 in 2 years of Gemini, and then the Apollo unmanned missions after the fire. So tell us a little bit about what you write about to show how America really lost interest quickly.
Okay. Well, it was really quite noticeable. The missions all seemed to kind of go flawlessly, or at least for the people watching. And we'd made it to the moon, and we'd walked on the moon. We met the objective, and so after that, people kind of wanted to move on to the next thing. Now, there's nothing simple about space flight, and there were each of the subsequent missions did important things, but even starting before the moon landing, the budget started getting cut back. And there were other things going on. There were changes in American society that people were getting adjusted to. And of course, we had the Vietnam War. And if you're talking about 3 guys going to the moon, that is less relevant to a lot of people than having somebody go off to war. Most people didn't know the astronauts, but most people did know somebody who was going off to the war, maybe getting killed in the war, and or it's certainly being changed by it. And so it was a much more immediate concern. And so it was just other events kind of overtook it. And then once we'd landed on the moon, that was the big, whew, we've done it type thing. You know, any project, any endeavor of any size that we go on, we hit some point where we think we've, you know, all right, we've done most of it. Now we can kind of just sort of clean it up, finish it up. And that's kind of where we were after Apollo 11, and of course the funding was cut proportionally. It was cut drastically after that.
What specific things you write in the book that you went to that showed how the interest had waned?
Well,
You talk about Apollo 12.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, okay, yeah.
you got easy access, and then incredibly, you couldn't believe how.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
With
I
Apollo,
thought it was really poignant how
Yeah.
how this
Yeah.
the demonstrations here is how the interest fell off.
Yeah. Well, as an example, thank you for reminding me about that. The Apollo 11 launch was the hottest ticket in town. My certain space workers could get a pass once in a green moon for one family member to go see a launch. And my dad had saved his up for years so that I could go to the launch of the moonshot.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had my pass in hand. I am sure there must have been a black market for them, but I got on the bus and they checked the pass and off we went. We watched the launch, and in fact, it was a great seat. I was close enough where I actually felt the heat of the engines.
Wow.
But the so that was a big deal. So Apollo 12, he was able to get a pass because nobody else wanted to use them. And for Apollo 14, I went with a high school group. We went on a school bus. The whole group came, as opposed to such limited access, but you had high school kids going on a school bus. So it was just a real shift in
almost desperate to have people at the Apollo 14 launch. It sounded like.
So, and granted, Apollo 11 was the big one, but these were still huge missions. Only 12 people have walked on the moon.
Absolutely, and to see that huge rocket launch off there, that's
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing that, Darren. And here's a beautiful picture of your mom and dad in their retirement there that you shared in there. Your mom's name again?
Anne
in there. You acknowledge in the book here. Let me give you some love there. He'd like to thank his parents, Ann and Al, and his wife, your wife Monica, for her original idea and unflagging support in so many ways. Ann Comer Myers, Dave and Georgianne Martin, Ron Fink, Bob Scheffler, Terry Wells, Michael Bonstra, and Denise Hollerback for their valuable input. That sounds like some of your writing friends in there. And so anyone else you want to thank on there?
Well, the last line, they're wonderful people, but they're all gone now.
All right. Well, deep gratitude to everyone that helped you with this thing. Wanted to give you some acknowledgement there. But the book is Behind the Missiles. Thank you for letting me share what we did about the book. There's many, many more stories in there. Just gave you a taste of it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to finish reading all the stories in there. Might you'll be hearing them on Stay Curious occasionally, where I said, "Hey, Vernon Conner wrote about this," and so it's got to be true.
There you go.
In there, Vernon, anything that I didn't ask you to share that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Well, I think you covered a lot of the material there, so I just say stay curious.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you're staying curious out there. And tomorrow's TGIF Friday, we're going to look at some space news that's making the news out there, including acting administrator has been chosen by the Trump administration, and a couple other things going on in the space front that we'll apprise you of, including how many people are orbiting the Earth right now, Vernon?
I don't know.
14.
14. That's
that's
certainly a step up from those days.
And it looks like Axiom 4 crew's coming back Saturday morning. We'll check with that and confirm all that tomorrow on Stay Curious. So, Marty, thank you for a good job there. We had a couple last-minute snafus that always happen when I'm so well prepared to do a program like I was today, and when I do it at the last minute, they seem to we don't have any problems, but that's okay. And Matthew Raj helping on our console here, hoping Matthew to help us out more on our Streamlab situation. Again, Vernon, true pleasure,
Thank you.
honor to
My
know
pleasure.
you and tell these stories about your dad. Hope your family enjoyed them. Truly national treasures, people that worked in our American space program, because they've done two things that no other nation has ever done: walk on the moon and build a permanent space station for international use. And we bless all the Apollo era and the shuttle era space workers thusly. So until tomorrow, I'm Mark Marquette saying thanks for watching, and I'll see you again to bridge the space between us.